There was a time before memory, a silence before words, where the world shivered in a cradle of dusk. Our ancestors, if they could be called such, moved like shadows across the skin of the earth. Their lives little more than whispers between storms, not of wolves, nor of hunger, though those too hunted them. The figures there are not scenes of hunt or ritual. Their skulls bear signs of stress, of insomnia, of trauma in infancy. Their bones tell stories of children kept awake too long, of mothers who sang with bleeding throats to hold the silence back. A society that did not live in days, but in the spaces between flickers of flame. Her bones were found in the Deer Valley, surrounded by red ochre and shattered teeth. And when she died quietly, beneath a withered tree, they buried her standing, facing the east, as if daring the dawn to return. She was no priestess, for there were no gods, no queen, for there were no kingdoms. Fear of what moved without being seen. But in her chest cavity were found hollowed bones of birds, carved with tiny marks, not by cruelty, but by design. Each bone told a story, not of war, not of joy, but of night, of something beneath the stars that was never named. She had gouged out her own eyes, and yet she lived long after. Her teeth worn from grinding, her fingers deformed from carving, and on her skull, the oldest known tattoo, the bisected sun. Because they did not own fire not yet. Fire was rare, a gift from storms, and always dying. It came and went like breath. It was not theirs, and without it, the dark was sovereign. And it taught them the most important lesson: to see was to survive. From this terror, vision was born. And with vision, the hunger for fire. They are spirals, mirrored faces, twisted limbs, reaching toward an unseen center. They warned each other of the long shadow, though none could describe it. They knew only that it came when voices fell silent, when the wind changed direction, when the air grew still and thick. It did not kill, at least not always. More often, it took a brother gone while fetching water, a child gone while sleeping too far from the others. Sometimes they returned, but not as they were. They came back cold, blank, eyes open but seeing something else. Some were silent, others laughed. One carved symbols into the dirt for hours before snapping his own neck with a grin too wide for his face. A pale handprint marks the ceiling, impossibly high, as if placed by something that floated. Beneath it, a symbol etched over and over, long before alphabets, a crude circle bisected by a jagged line. The split sun, they say, the eye that doesn't blink. No, it was night that stalked their dreams. Not the celestial night of stars and gentle moons, but something more ancient, more insidious. A night that breathed, that remembered. They had no gods, no stories, only the dark and the things it promised. There are no written records of that age, of course. How could there be? But the bones speak, and the bones do not lie. We find them curled in corners of caves, always facing inward, as if they feared what waited behind their own eyes. They were not beasts, not entirely. Their skulls, cracked and wide, held the weight of thought, and with thought came terror. In the northern ridges of what we now call the Karakoram, there exists a cave whose walls are painted in blood, older than any tribe. We cannot know what they called the Dark Wu. We know how it shaped them. And so they told stories in grunts and scratches, in trembling hands and wild eyes. These were not myths, these were warnings, a shared memory, passed not by language but by fear, a language of instinct. And in that age, one figure stands out, not for greatness, but for tragedy. The people feared her, and yet they followed. When she walked, they walked. When she stopped, they built camp. In that age, darkness was not the unknown. It was the familiar, the known enemy, the patient predator. It was not evolution that gave us eyes sharp enough to hunt, to judge distance, to read another's gaze. It was fear. They say man emerged from the dark, that the light lifted us. But what if it was the darkness that shaped us? And what if, in some ancient corner of our mind, a part of us still remembers what it was like to live not in daze, but in dread? No one remembers his name, not even the stones. But the wind that sighs through the dead river canyon still hums with the echoes of his moment. One man, trembling, terrified, struck stone upon stone and woke the sleeping light. It was not genius. It was not divine inspiration. It was accident, born from panic. His tribe was starving, frostbitten, hunted. They had fled the caves where the shadows moved and sought refuge beneath an open sky. There, in desperation, he struck once, twice, and then flame. But the fire did not roar. It did not dance. It whispered. They say the first fire did not burn bright. It hissed low, like breath caught in the throat. Its smoke curled downward. It gave no warmth. It cast no light. Only shadows, as if the flame remembered them, as if it had been waiting. The fire didn't flicker, it pulsed like a heartbeat. Its center was blue, cold. One by one, they approached it, warmer, normal, touched it, heard things. And so they began to treat fire as a god. But always, beneath the worship, was fear. Not fear of fire itself, but of what fire kept away. They began keeping flames lit, even in daylight. They burned wood, fat, bone, anything that would last. Entire forests fell to their fear. The night was not to be trusted, but neither was the light, dragging behind them not just stories or tools, but the fear they would never again be able to forget. Strange ones, shadows that moved even when their owners did not. The tribe watched in awe, then terror. And though it held the dark at bay, it also whispered, always whispered, of what lay behind that veil, a promise or a threat, that it belonged to what the darkness once was, and that by wielding it, we had declared ourselves enemies to something eternal, closer. One boy reached into the dark for a fallen tool and pulled back nothing but a wrist. Another heard his own voice calling from the woods. A third vanished without a trace, only for his shadow to appear days later, cast upon a rock with nothing to cast it. The man knelt before it, his hands blistered, his eyes wild. And then the fire spoke. It licked dry bark. It consumed. But unlike the gift of the heavens, it did not vanish with the wind. It stayed. And for the first time in human history, night was held back not by instinct, but by will. No words, not in the way we understand them, but meaning, emotion, dread, wrapped in familiarity. That night, no one slept. He walked at night, barefoot in the frost, whispering to trees. Once, he tried to extinguish the flame. It refused. He buried it. In earth it emerged. He drowned it in water, floated, sizzling. Finally, he walked into the fire. A woman screamed and ran into the hills, never seen again. A child laughed and then fell into seizure. The oldest of them began to sing a melody no one recognized. Eyes rolled back. But the man, the one who made it, he wept, not with joy, but with guilt, as if he had awakened something that should have remained forgotten. And yet the fire did not die. They did not understand what they had done, but they understood what it meant. They could no longer pretend to be prey. The fire gave them power, and power demands cost. The man who kindled it grew distant. He stopped speaking. They say he did not scream. He folded, like paper, into it. And when it was done, the fire burned brighter. It was then the others began to believe it had been fed, not by wood, but by something deeper, something bound to them. They named it various names across lands and centuries: Callan, the ever-eater; Jur, the eye that wakes; Yara, the hungering sister. They noticed it soon after, that when the flame dimmed, the shadows grew bolder. These were not coincidences. These were warnings. And the people, primitive though they were, understood warnings, because fire does not care for man. It serves no master. It only consumes. Some began to speak of a pact, that perhaps the fire was not ours, that it was stolen. The caves fell silent. The stars began to dim. And the people, now bipedal, fire-wielding, awake, began the long march into history, because now they knew the dark was not empty, and light was not salvation. It was a scream, and we were the ones who answered it. The oldest lie we ever told ourselves was that light meant safety, that with flame came dominion, that once the darkness had been pushed back, it would forget us. But the shadows never forgot. They only learned not to hide from predators, but to face the east always, the east. For they believed the sun, in rising, dragged the world back from the edge of swallowing. Each dusk was a death, each dawn rebirth. They called themselves the Arakir, the recalled ones. They were older than the language of the tribe, but somehow understood by all who heard them. He spoke of the time before the split, when all was one, and silence was harmony. That light, when born, was not creation, but rupture. That what we call darkness is not death, but memory. And they did not fear the dark like others did. In a stretch of highland, known now only by coordinates and satellite fog, an ancient tribe once carved their dwellings into the red cliffs. They respected it. It began with the voice. One night, a boy mute, since births, stood up during the vigil and began to speak in flawless cadence. His words were not his own. They watched in horror and reverence as the boy recited line after line of something scripture, perhaps, or testimony. A woman would turn to speak and vanish mid-sentence. Children sat down for meals and left no bones behind. Then he collapsed, his skin ice cold, his eyes pitch black. But all agreed on one thing: the pact had been broken. And whatever peace had been brokered in the long dark had been shattered. They erased words from walls, covered the mouth of the boy prophet with veils of silk. They did not bury him. They called it the mouth of fire. There they made an offering, not of meat or goods, but of memory. Each elder carved from their own flesh a mark of regret, of a secret kept, a sin buried. They bled into the earth, chanting not to the sky, but to the stone below. And the mountain listened. They placed him in the stone cradle, reserved for prophets. And each night thereafter, a different member of the tribe heard the same voice in dreams, not commanding, not even threatening, just speaking, always beginning with the same phrase: "You are remembered." The dreams spread like contagion. Men wept at dawn. Women scratched symbols into the stone with bloodied fingers. No bones, no belongings, only shadows, perfectly preserved. He ran down the mountain trail, clutching a flame in each hand. He did not return. The next morning, the flames were found still burning on the path, but upside down, floating untouched by wind. The fire pits were left unlit for 3 days, and in that time no one died, no animals were taken. The wolves howled farther away. It was as if the dark had accepted them. But harmony is a fragile thing, especially when built on fear. On the 4th day, a hunter, terrified of what the dreams might mean, attempted to flee before dusk. That night, the dreams stopped. Silence returned. And then the deaths began. Not violent, not loud, just ... gone. A man would sleep and never wake. Panic spread, as it always does. Some blamed the voice, others blamed the hunter. In desperation, the elders held council at the edge of the cliff, where the sun first kissed the rock. That night, no one vanished, but no one spoke again, either. From that day forward, the Araker communicated only in gesture. Their stories became dances, their warnings, the tilt of a head, and when outsiders came centuries later, all they found were silhouettes burned into stone, entire families, frozen in mid-motion. The fire pits were still full, but not a single spark remained. The only writing found, hidden deep in a sealed cavern, read, "We were not the first to speak, and we will not be the last to fall silent." They had learned the truth too late, that the darkness does not wish to destroy us, it only wishes to be heard. And when we speak too loudly, it listens. He was born in the age when men began to shape stone, not into shelter, but into symbol. Where once fires had been merely warmth and ward, now they were arranged in patterned circles, stars, spirals each, a geometry of superstition. They called him Velen, the architect, though no name was ever chiseled into his bones. He appeared not as a prophet, nor as a king, but as a builder, with eyes like cooled ash and hands that never trembled. In a time when villages feared the dark, as one might fear an old god, Velen claimed to have tamed it. He arrived in settlements cloaked in soot, offering a gift: hearths that never went cold, light that never dimmed, walls that swallowed shadow entirely, roofs that glowed from within without flame. Villages, once plagued by whispers at night, slept dreamlessly. No vanishings, no screams, only peace. A house without doors, a mouth with no teeth, and beneath it, in childish script, "He feeds it dreams." He said he had seen the dark for what it truly was, not a void, but a structure. But worst of all, the people no longer dreamed. When questioned, they simply smiled, blinked slowly, and returned to their tasks. Darkness returned instantly, but it was not the same. It was heavier, intentional. Eventually, they forgot why they had fled at all, and many returned, as if what had waited behind the false light now entered fully, having been invited by absence. Children forgot how to cry. Mothers sang lullabies without melody. Men no longer looked at the sky. A shape, and like any shape, it could be countered, neutralized, broken. Only a single tablet, scorched black but unburned, etched upon it. Some peered too closely and claimed to see images dancing in the flames, faces they recognized. He wrote of eyes watching him from walls of fire that cast no heat, of laughter that came from chimneys. He described Velen changed, unaged, working at dusk on a new structure shaped like a spiral, collapsing inward. The man fled at sunrise. His last words: "Their light is hollow, their warmth is borrowed." Moments they'd forgotten. A man threw water upon his hearth, and heard his own name screamed from the steam. His creations were marvels, fire that hummed but did not crackle. For a time, then came the stillness. It began in the first villageoran's grasp. Birds stopped migrating overhead, trees ceased growing, the rivers hushed. Velen did not leave. He stayed, building still. He claimed that silence was purity, that the dark had been neutralized, and with it, all chaos. "We are free," he whispered, "of fear and of need." But one night, a child drew something in the ash outside her home. Within days, she was gone. The elders began to wonder, what did the fires burn, if not wood? They had not added fuel in months. The illusion of peace shattered. In revolt, a handful of villagers tore down their luminous roofs. The villagers fled, but wherever they went, the dark followed. Not physically, but in thought. They forgot things, names, paths, the shape of fire. Velen welcomed them with open arms. Still building, always building. His voice now echoed when he spoke, as if two mouths moved at once. The final record came from a trader who wandered into one of Velen's settlements looking for salt. Years later, when explorers searched for these villages, they found only foundations, perfectly square impressions in the earth. No bones, no ash. We tried to master the dark. We taught it to wait, learned too well. Velen was never found. But some say when your fire dims too suddenly, when its glow flickers just before sleep, you may catch a glimpse of him in the corner, building something, something that remembers. In the southern delta of a land swallowed now by ocean and myth, there lived a people whose fear of darkness shaped not just their stories, but their bodies. They were called the Ancient, though some scholars argue the name translates more closely to those who glow. Their bones, discovered deep beneath layers of calcified river mud, are unlike any others. To make themselves not just carriers of fire, but vessels of it. For centuries, they lived under a sky choked with ash, where dusk came early and dawn came late. Crops failed, children were born blind, and from the forest's edge a new sound emerged, neither beast nor wind, but something slower, breathing, watching. The Ancient knew the fire would not save them. It had grown too weak, too distant. They needed something stronger, something ... permanent, not deformed, modified. Every skull bears signs of deliberate alteration, hollows behind the eyes, canals drilled through the cheekbones, traces of rare minerals embedded in the cranium. What purpose could such cruelty serve? The answer, if the ancients are to be believed, was light. The enkindled stood silently, watching it happen, not intervening, not mourning, just present. She stood at its peak for 3 days, eyes unblinking, and on the third night she opened her chest. The Ancient, it is said, sought to internalize flame. The forest, the village, the river itself, gone, replaced by an unnatural clearing where nothing has grown since. So they turned inward, led by a high priestess called Sehal. They began a process known only as the enkindling. It began with fasting, isolation, and silence. Satellite images show static where the land should be, and beneath that static, if you listen closely enough, there is a pulse, slow, steady, like something sleeping. Their presence calmed children and repelled the things that moved in the woods. They did not need fire, they had become it. Each initiate drank a serum made from powdered quartz and honey sap, then lay beneath a canopy of bone-lit mirrors. They were not allowed to move, not allowed to sleep. For 7 nights, They stared at the flame in their mind, until it either consumed them or changed them. Few survived. Those who did were said to glow, not with visible light, but with something deeper, a heat, a knowing. Their skin was always warm. But, as with all things that defy the dark, a price was paid. The enkindled did not age. At first, this was seen as blessing, but then their shadows vanished. No matter how bright the sun, how near the fire, they cast none. And those around them began to dream differently. Dreams of vast, black fields with mouths instead of trees, of music without sound, of Sahal's voice echoing not in words but in hunger. Then came the forgetting. One by one, villagers forgot the names of their children, then their own names. Language dissolved, memory frayed like worn rope. When the final villager fell to silence, Sahal ascended the spire of Titha Tower, carved into a petrified tree where only fire was permitted to burn. They say the flame inside her burst, free, not wild, not violent, but clean. It did not scorch the earth, it erased it. Modern explorers avoid the area. Birds will not fly over it. One journal, left behind by a vanished archaeologist, reads, "They did not destroy the darkness. They became its lighthouse. And lighthouses, too, must eventually dim." The ancient tried to win by becoming the flame, but the dark does not fear fire. It waits for it to go out, and it always does. Far to the west, beyond the salt dunes and skeleton coasts, once lay a settlement called Lirnaso. Old, its name may predate human speech. It was never found on maps, only remembered in the dread songs of desert traders and whispered lines of half-burnt scrolls. Lirna was not a city of stone, but of cloth and silence. Tents stretched like skin over frames of bone, arranged in perfect concentric circles, each layer closer to a center. None were allowed to see. They did not worship the sun, nor even fire. They worshipped something they called the unseen moon. Every 29th night, when no moon rose and the sky became a perfect void, they held their harvest. Not of crops, there were none, but of memory. Each citizen would step forward and whisper a secret into a clay jar. Then, under the veil of a black sky, the jars were buried in the earth, never to be unearthed again. These offerings, they claimed, were food for the unseen moon. It did not crave flesh. It fed on what should not be said. And in return, it kept the night thin, their word for survivable. Outsiders mocked the tradition, but those who stayed in Lirna overnight never laughed twice. One trader went mad after sleeping on the 30th night. The cloths parted for her, no wind, no sound, and then the sky broke. He awoke, babbling in a language not yet invented, tearing at his skin, repeating one phrase. It opened, black, but deeper than black. It bled downward like ink in water. Then the singing began. He died blind, but not of trauma. His eyes had simply vanished. Every Lirnahi dropped to their knees, clutching their ears, not in pain but recognition. Some collapsed into silence. Others turned into dust before they could flee. Nilai remained standing. Her mouth finally opened, and she said, "I remember what we were." A rare fragment of obsidian, shaped like a crescent with no curve, was found buried where no obsidian should be. When held, listeners swear they hear names they've never said aloud. The song named them, every moment, every lie, every cruelty. It dragged their truths into the open. The harvest they had hidden now poured freely from the air itself. Still, the Lirnahi did not resist. They accepted the cost. They believed the dark was not malevolent, but intimate. From birth, she never blinked, she never spoke, but she watched everything. The elders feared her, yet they did not cast her out. They called her Nilai, which in their tongue meant not yet given, that it knew them better than they knew themselves. The harvest was not just a ritual, it was a protection from the self. If one fed the darkness the truth, it would not come to claim it. But one year, a child refused. She had been born during the thinnest night in memory, so thin the stars flickered like candles, drowning in breath. When her first harvest came, she was offered a jar. She crushed it. No one stopped her. On the night of the unseen moon, she walked barefoot to the center of the rings, the place no feet had touched in centuries. There was no other word. It didn't tear, it broke. A line of absence spread across the stars, not from mouths, from earth, from shadow, from memory. Many ran, and then Lerna was gone, not destroyed, erased. Even the dunes forgot it. Cartographers argue over satellite gaps. Nomads claim they dream of tents burning without fire. We have always feared the dark for what it hides. But Lirna teaches us another terror. What if the dark remembers everything we try to forget? To the north, beyond the reach of the last migrating birds, where the air thins and the moss glows faintly with forgotten breath, lies a forest with no name. Not because it was never given one, but because each time it was spoken aloud, something vanished. First, it was tools, then trails, then people. In the time of the early chronicles, this forest was called in hushed tones Harail, a word whose roots may mean the place where sky bends down. No tribe claimed it, but every tribe feared it. Hunters would skirt its edge, leaving offerings of bone and ash. They spoke of the breathless night, when even wind dared not pass through. They entered with instruments, with songs, with fire that hummed like trapped birds. They marked their path with red cords tied to trees. Each night they reported symbols carved newly into the bark, spirals, eyes, a figure with outstretched arms and no face. The voice was calm to calm. It said, not with twinkle or cloud but absence. There, the sky was smooth, featureless. The stars did not go out, they simply avoided it. Astronomers who mapped the heavens centuries later were baffled by the irregularity, noting a cartographic blind spot in the night sky, precisely aligned with the canopy of Harrow. Not by choice none would burn. The match would strike, the wood would spark, and then darkness would pour over it like oil. No creature entered, not bird, not insect. The silence became so dense it warped sound. Shouts came out as whispers. Songs returned as sobs. Cold, wet, absolute, a shadow above shadows. Photographs taken decades apart show a growing hole in the sky, a perfect circle. Scholars debated atmospheric interference. They were wrong, then silence. And they remember the first darkness that came down from above, not from below. Not from superstition, but from pattern. Pattern never lies. They all share the same image, a tree with no bark, whose roots bleed into sky, whose leaves are open eyes. Beneath it, a figure stands, its arms always outstretched, inviting, not demanding, just present. One such pattern, stars. Above the forest, stars flickered strangely. Then came the expedition. They were scholars from the low valleys, obsessed with celestial memory. 7. In Aldriven, brilliant, arrogant. On the 5th night, one of them began coughing petals, then feathers. By the 6th, they no longer lit fires. Their final recording, a voice log, made by the last scholar, was found buried in wax inside a bird's skull, discovered decades later by a shepherd. We saw the sky blink, and in that blink it remembered we are not meant to look up. No trace of the scholars was ever found, but something had changed. The forest began to move, not walk, but breathe. Trees bent when none touched them, ground softened. Then the stars began to vanish for real. Night by night, constellations disappeared only above that region. Because the tribes remember. They remember the time before words, when the sky was full. And now, again, something waits in Hirel. Occasionally, travelers report dreams. A single phrase, burned into the inside of their thoughts. Come into the place where light forgets to return. What if the stars do not shine above the forest because they are afraid? And what if one day they stop shining everywhere else too? High atop the stone ridges of the southern spine, where the air carries no scent and the wind never whistle, sits the remains of a monastery built from ash, not stone covered in soot, not wood scorched black. No ash, compressed, layered, shaped as if by invisible hands. It rises like a memory half forgotten, its corners too sharp, its walls too silent. And they believed that darkness was not a punishment, nor a void, but a sacred state of being. That before light there was understanding, that vision fractured the soul, that only by unseeing could truth be restored. No one knows who built it. No one claims to have seen it built. It has always simply been. Each stage of blindness was seen as a spiritual ascent. By the time a monk had lived through 20 winters, he had become a saint of the second dark. By 30, a saint of the root. Her writings, preserved on thin clay sheets, speak of visions that did not occur in time. She claimed to witness humanity's birth and extinction simultaneously. The final testimony, carved into the floor beneath the central altar, read, she described cities growing backwards, oceans rising from dry bone, stars screaming as they were born. Only a handful ever reached the final stage, those who, it was said, began to see again. No tools, only robes, folded perfectly, placed in circles. At the center of each, a smooth, black stone, warm to the touch. Each stone, when placed against the ear, hums a different tone, not melody, not language, just a breath, as if something had once been said there and had not yet finished. At night, it is darker than the sky. She believed the monastery was built atop its footprint, and that, by giving up sight, the monks had made themselves visible to it. But stories remain. One man returned to his village, only to discover he could no longer recognize his reflection. He whispered to mirrors. He refused to sleep in lit rooms. He claimed that in the dark he felt whole. They say the monastery was home to a sect that did not pray to gods or stars or flames but to silence. They called themselves the children of lightless grace. A chant would begin with 30 voices and end with 29. No one paused, no one mourned. Silence, after all, was sacred. Only when their own names began fading from memory did they realize what was happening. They plucked their eyes out, not all at once, but slowly, ritualistically. But what they saw was not the world. One such Saint Mother overwrote her testimony by guiding a scribe's hand with her own. But above all, she spoke of the crown of absence, a presence that moved through unlit spaces, never touching, never taking, but noticing. And it noticed. One by one, the monks began disappearing, not in body, but in voice. The monastery was not just made of ash, it was becoming ash, slowly, patiently. The stone tablets grew brittle, their histories flaked into dust. The last light we surrender is the memory of ourselves, and then nothing. When explorers first reached the site, they found no bones. Attempts to remove the stones always fail. They return, no matter how far they're taken. Some visitors, those who stay to long report, forgetting colors, then names. The monastery remains. It does not decay. No birds land on it. No plants grow near it. And if you kneel in the center of its altar, some say you will hear your own name spoken in a voice that sounds nothing like your own. Perhaps there is something holy in the dark. But holiness does not mean mercy. There once lived a man who believed no place should be unknown. His name was Alrek Venna, cartographer, not by trade, but by obsession. He charted glaciers no one dared cross, mapped islands whispered of only in madness, traced the curves of continents from the tips of bird bones and broken compasses. His maps were not just works of geography, they were poems of control. To name a place was, to him, to defeat it. At the edge of every known world weather, drawn by firelight or star, there remained a blemish, a curl of ink, a smudge, a silence. He called it the hollow meridian. It was not a place, it was the refusal of place. No records held its shape, no language would form its borders. Mariners who approached it returned with lost time and blank eyes. They sailed not in a ship of wood, but of horn and bone, stitched with sealskin and secrets. No mast, only breath. And the stars they followed were not in the sky but in the water, flickering downward like lures. Maps, thousands of them stitched together, layered, overlapping, a continent of discarded knowledge, and on its center, a tower with no base, floating just above the ground, tethered by chains of sound. The sky sank, the ocean rose, and then quiet. Every journey he had taken, every mistake, every revision, cities that didn't exist, roads that led inward, not outward, and written at the bottom of each, drawn from memory, not yours. Not the absence of sound, but the denial of it. His fingers bled from ink pressed too hard. He scratched parchment with bone, then with nail. Each line he drew, the sea grew darker, until his bones felt reversed. And then, at last, he stopped, because there was no more Alrek to continue. The wind colder, symbols they cannot identify. One cartographer claimed his hands moved without permission. Another drew an entire coastline, only to find no such continent on Earth, but an exact match in a dream he hadn't had yet. Each man claimed to feel watched, not by eyes, but by memory, as if the place itself recalled versions of them they had forgotten. Their sails blackened, their shadows stretched in wrong directions. The blind navigator stared into the void and whispered, "We have never left." Alrek could not accept this. Immediately, direction failed. The compass spun without pause. The stars above flickered, then inverted. The child began drawing symbols on the deck's brills with teeth. The mirror maker dropped her glass and wept without tears. Alrek, despite the terror, continued mapping. On the 21st day, they found land, not earth, not stone, but land made of paper. Inside, Alrek found a room made entirely of his own maps. The crew was gone. No wreckage, no trace. Alrek climbed the tower. It had no top, no sky above, just more stairs. He climbed until his breath turned to salt. The tower still stands. To this day, scattered across the globe, mapmakers report spontaneous ink bleeding into shapes they did not draw. Some say Alrek succeeded. He mapped the hollow meridian, and now it maps us back. And so we arrive, not at an end, but at the place where endings are forgotten, where history dissolves into myth, and myth whispers back, "I was always real." It has worn many masks: forest, sea, silence, sky. It has walked as absence and spoken as memory. It has not hunted us with teeth or claws, but with reminders of what we were before fire, before names, before the illusion of safety. Now, the world of glowing glass and humming towers, of electric suns and walls that shine all night. We've banished the shadows from our rooms, our streets, our skies. Satellites ring the earth like false moons, and still we feel it. We have run from it, dared to light it, attempted to speak over it, but still it waits. We've declared it vanquished in textbooks and entertainment, but we know, deep down, and maybe that's the truth, the old stories tried to give us not fear, but memory, not doom, but reflection. We are what remains when the skin of civilization peels away, because perhaps that is the oldest secret. That truth does not need to be believed, it only needs to be remembered. Cities where, once a year, no sound can be recorded. Machines that draw symbols of things not programmed. An island in the far north where compasses spin like dancers and no birds ever land. These are not accidents. They are echoes, reminders. The dark does not take, it reveals. The darkness has never been a question. It is the answer that waits when all other answers fail, and still it watches. There is one final story, one that does not belong to a lost tribe or forgotten place, but to us, in the moments between breaths, in the flicker of a screen just before it fails, in the way the silence returns just a second too soon after laughter ends. We've buried the darkness under megawatts and mythology. We return to the cave. There are reports, small, strange, children born without shadows, because in darkness we are no longer performers, no longer stories, and what remains is ... unfinished. Do you feel it? The hum behind your thoughts when the lights go out. The sense that something once stood behind you and might still. That is not fear, that is memory. The first one, the only one that matters. So, let this story end as it began, not with fire, not with a scream, but with silence. The kind of silence that listens, the kind of silence that breathes. And in that breath, remember, the darkness was never our enemy. It was our witness. It saw us first, and it will see us last.